bill 67 to 42 to recriminalize these casinos, particularly the slot machines, and thereby create consumer jobs. Bet you didn't hear this story. Guess what? Governor Rod Blagojevich killed the bill procedurally, didn't want to have to deal with it. And this is the same governor that you know was impeached in 2009, indicted in 2009, convicted in 2010. Now, like other states, Illinois has been giving away billions of dollars to gambling interests, which is one reason why Illinois is at one of the top 3 states with the worst budget shortfalls. Nevada, by the way, is another one. With regard to the original 10 casino licenses in Illinois, worth a fair market value of $5 billion, they were given away to political insiders for $25,000 each. A $5 billion giveaway of the taxpayer revenues, or potential revenues. And in 2011, the lame duck Illinois legislature, the day before the new legislature was sworn in, raised the state income tax 66%. While disregarding that for the last 10 years they've been lowering the taxes on gambling facilities year after year after year. Lower taxes on gambling, higher taxes on all of us U.S. citizens. And now the state of Illinois has just passed a law directly challenging the federal ban on internet gambling. It's a test case. Why am I concerned about this, and why should we all be concerned about this? Well, among other things, worldwide, government-sponsored gambling creates new addicted gamblers like drug addiction, up 100% among adults, up 200% among teens and college students. New bankruptcies, up 18 to 42% around gambling facilities as people lose their money to the consumer economy. And new crime, increasing 10% per year. For 15 years, the socioeconomic academic studies have shown that the cost to the taxpayers of all this gambling are at least $3, $4, $5 for every $1 in benefits. Now, you're only going to hear about the benefits from the lobbyists. In particular, internet gambling is known as the crack cocaine of gambling. Legalizing internet gambling would put gambling at every work desk, at every school desk, and in every living room, simplifying the ability to click your mouse, lose your house. Now, Representative Spencer Baucus has complained about a $100 million lobbying campaign to legalize internet gambling. And since internet gambling is illegal, officials would like to know where is this $100 million coming from. And now you've got David Keene's position, the heir apparent to David Keene's position, is a casino lobbyist from Florida. So the question is, will CPAC also soon be in the pockets of the casino lobbyists? Now, by comparison, my colleagues and I, academic colleagues, several of them, accept no honorarium or consultant fees for talking about these issues and educating the public. We could obviously make a whole lot of money if we would spend the facts toward gambling. So in summary, to paraphrase George Hegel, those who forget the economic lessons of history are condemned to relive them. Economics 101 confirms that nations, like individuals, cannot gamble their way to prosperity, but they can gamble their way into recessions and even depression. Internet gambling is not an individual freedom issue. It's an economic survival issue. To maintain our constitutional freedoms, we need a strong economy. Our constitutional forebears committed themselves to, quote, a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. Today, we as Americans must rededicate ourselves to work under divine providence and not gamble with lady luck. We must not gamble away our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kindt. Thank you, Professor Kindt. We'll have a Q&A, and we'll have a reply. Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I'm not here to talk about internet gambling or any other behavior on the internet. I'm here to talk about government control of how the internet operates. Something more fundamental, actually. So first of all, now that I've told you what I'm not talking about, let me give you a little bit of history about the internet itself. It was privatized in 1994, and since then has migrated further away from government control, well, at least until December 21st here in this country. And as it migrated further away from government control, it proliferated. It became the greatest deregulatory success story of all time, at least in my view. It has been the fastest penetrating disruptive technology ever invented by mankind. The architecture of the Internet, a global network of networks, it defies top-down authoritarianism. It is really based on something that enhances the sovereignty of the individual. The architecture of the networks and the protocols work around bottlenecks and controls. That's how it works. And I'm going to talk more about this in Q&A, and I hope we have enough time for Q&A, so I'll try to rush through this. Okay. So in short, the Internet sort of became, since it was privatized in 1994, which, by the way, was part of a bipartisan international consensus. It was actually Clinton-Gore administration policy that I'm defending right now. It became a bit of a libertarian heaven in that regard. So Internet governance historically has never been governmental. It has been somewhat lawless. Non-governmental groups have been in charge of making sure the Internet works. Groups like the Internet Society and the Internet Engineering Task Force. Those are comprised of volunteers, academics, engineers, people acting in their own capacity and not on behalf of any government, certainly, or corporation. And it has worked. The Internet has worked, and it has grown, it has become robust, and it has enhanced human freedom throughout the world. So keep in mind that this has been the bipartisan consensus up until December 21st. Today, as of December 21st, the FCC crossed an important regulatory Rubicon, a Rubicon that is anti-freedom. It decided in a 3-2 vote, obviously I dissented, to initiate regulations of the Internet, to have Internet network management be regulated much the way a phone company, a monopoly phone company, was. Modeled on the 1934 Communications Act that, of course, was set up to regulate the old AT&T voice monopoly. So what is wrong with that? Well, in my dissent, I had sort of 4 basic complaints with that. First of all, nothing is broken with the Internet. Nothing needs fixing. The government does not need to intervene. The factual predicate doesn't exist. Number 2, the FCC does not have the authority to do what it did. The FCC, in its action on December 21st, defied a court order from last spring, U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, as well as a large bipartisan majority of Congress. Last year, 302 members of Congress wrote to the FCC, including 86 Democrats, in one form or another saying, leave this matter to Congress or don't do anything at all or something along those lines, but certainly don't do what you're about to do. So this is really sort of jaw-dropping interventionism, in my view. So that was nothing is broken. It didn't have the authority. What it did do is also unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment as regulatory takings and under the First Amendment. These are private platforms. These were not built with public money. These were built with private risk capital. And no one had to sign up for cable television when the cable plant was being built, for instance. Would we think this was such a good idea if the government started dictating how newspapers could manipulate their content in a newspaper? Of course not. That's a different platform, but it's a very strong analogy. Number 3, the FCC's order actually will cause irreparable harm. It will undercut investment. It will actually deter broadband deployment and adoption throughout this country, and also start to put us at a competitive disadvantage. And number 4, there's existing law that prevents all of the fears that have been thrown out there for the past 8 or 9 years when the term net neutrality, which sounds good if you say it fast, existing law already exists to address all those fears through the antitrust statutes, Section 2 of the Sherman Act, for all the lawyers in the crowd, Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act. Those are all covered. If there becomes a concentration and abuse of market power, law already exists to cause that. But what is perhaps the most frightening here are the international implications of what the FCC did. For a number of years, since the Internet was actually migrating further away from government control, a lot of our international neighbors have been trying to impose more control. And certainly we know about individual countries, whether it's China or Saudi Arabia or Iran or Syria and others, strict government control over Internet communications. And the most obvious recent example, of course, is Egypt. we've all sort of learned, the general public has sort of learned the term kill switch here in just the past couple of weeks, right? To where the government had its hand on the mechanics of the internet and was able to turn it off, just the way you would a spigot. This is frightening. And so individual countries have been able to do this. When you look around the globe, it's not private sector mischief with the internet that's occurring. It's state interventionism that is occurring to the detriment of liberty. So what's also going on at the UN level, and I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal last summer, is that there, for years, has actually been a greater movement for UN control of internet governance. So the registry of domain names, the .coms and .orgs of the world, but also now for just governance of the mechanics of the internet, to have an overarching international body. I'm not making this up. This just happened again in December, another big push at the UN. So what the U.S. has done right at this point, it's lost the moral high ground. What it is saying now, it's forced to say now, is no, you other governments, don't regulate the internet the way you think is reasonable. We're going to regulate it the way we think is reasonable. So your definition so now we're debating what is reasonable, which is perhaps the most litigated word in U.S. history and probably world history, right? So it becomes a matter of where regulation only seems to grow, it never seems to shrink. So in short, just in closing, as we've had a lot of talk about the Gipper's 100th birthday here recently, to paraphrase a quote that one of my favorite quotes of his is, he says, there are those who, if they see something moving, they tax it. If it keeps moving, they regulate it. And if it stops moving, they subsidize it. Let's not let that happen to the internet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John?
Thank you, Wayne. You just may be the John Locke of the digital age, though. And I want to thank the CPAC organizers for inviting me here today. From 1997 to 2003, I had the pleasure of being a staff member for a Republican member of Congress. These were the formative days of the internet, and there was a constant debate on Capitol Hill about what government's role should be in regulating this emerging marketplace. During these years, and for the most part, Congress took a pro-consumer, free market approach to internet regulation. Because of this freedom, the internet has become the single most important vehicle for human communication and commerce. Today, we talk about Facebook, Twitter, and Google, not Ford, AT&T, and General Electric. While I may be biased, given my political leanings, I think the core conservative values, principles of freedom, personal responsibility, and minimal government interference are the principles that have allowed the internet to thrive and become the powerhouse it is today. One of the byproducts of this growth has been that millions of Americans and billions of worldwide have turned to the internet for recreation. Internet poker has become a popular pastime for millions of people. This activity is especially popular among Americans who have taken the game traditionally played at the kitchen table and moved it to the computer table. The internet has transformed the game of poker, and as it has transformed so much of our daily lives. Ironically, however, it was that same Republican-led Congress that I worked in that had this hands-off approach to the internet that passed a law in 2006 that is an affront to conservative principles and sought to greatly restrict internet freedom. In 2006, Congress passed the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, or UGIA. This ill-conceived law tried to prevent Americans from wagering on the internet by forcing banks to block their customers' unlawful internet gambling transactions, whatever that may be, never defined. The law was so poorly written that it took regulators more than 3 years to figure out how to implement it. And now that the law is fully in effect, guess what? More Americans are playing internet poker today than ever before. The UGIA is a textbook example of poor public policy and of why prohibitions don't work. I'd like to see a show of hands of people in this room who believe that government should be in the business of passing laws that seek to prevent responsible adults from playing online poker with their own money from their own computers. That's what I thought. Not only is it unpopular, it's bad policy, and it's at the opposite core of our conservative values, which I believe, and I suspect most of you believe in this room. The fact is, notwithstanding every effort to prohibit the activity, Americans will continue to play online poker. The question we face today is whether Americans should continue to play on internet sites based overseas without any U.S. oversight, or whether our country will license the industry, bring it on our shores, create economic growth, and protect consumers. Believe it or not, I stand before you today to advocate for government regulation. To be clear, we're not proposing that the heavy-handed government control this industry. Far from it. Government's role in internet gaming regulation should be to ensure competition and, most importantly, consumer protection. It is clear that a policy of prohibition will fail, so the sensible alternative is regulation. It's interesting to note that just this week, Republican Congressman John Campbell announced that he plans to introduce legislation that would expand this freedom through appropriate government oversight. His bill will require a thorough vetting of potential licenses, mandatory implementation of technologies to protect against underage gambling, and monitor and detect individuals with excessive gambling habits. His bill would also set a high standard to thwart fraud and abuse of customers, regulation to prevent money laundering, and processes to prevent tax avoidance. In addition, it would create a structure through which to collect much-needed revenue from these operators, which is all currently going overseas. We have the expertise, we have the structure, and we have an industry willing to be part of a regulated American market. We can make this happen, and we can get big government off of our computers. So what's the holdup? Well, as any industry, there are those who feel threatened by competition and a new industry encroaching on their turf. And then there are those who oppose all forms of gambling for moral reasons. And I respect that. What is harder to respect is the idea that because someone disapproves of a particular activity, they would seek to have the government prevent others from doing it. You have heard from my fellow panelists that a licensed and regulated online poker is a gateway to mass financial ruin, broken home, and nefarious activities. I wholeheartedly disagree, and all the credible data disagree. He may say that gambling cheats, but freedom never does. I won't stand here and tell you that licensing and regulation will eliminate all the gambling addictions or protect every child. That's unrealistic, and as it is with any activity. What I can tell you, though, is that the best way to address any of the perceived ills of gambling, giving adults this freedom, is through responsible regulation, not prohibition. More than any other value, America is supposed to be about freedom. Except when one's actions directly and necessarily harm other people's life, liberty, or property, the government is supposed to leave its citizens alone in this country. In fact, it was Ronald Reagan who once said, "I believe in a government that protects us from each other. I do not believe in a government that protects us from ourselves." As a Republican and as a poker player, I am hopeful that we can reverse our insane policies as they relate to internet poker. If an adult wants to enjoy a hand of Texas Hold'em in their own home, on their own personal internet connection, they should be able to do so in a safe marketplace. Should I win? Should I lose? That's the consequences of my own actions, and I should take responsibility for it. If you remember one thing after this panel, I hope it's this. Americans are playing and will continue to play online poker regardless of the law. Policymakers and Professor Kindt can choose to ignore this fact and let Americans play on sites with no U.S. jurisdiction, or they can choose to license online poker and let responsible adults enjoy a true American pastime from the comfort of their own home. Let me end by quoting one of our fellow conservatives, George F. Will. He wrote in one of his weekly columns, quote, "It is a poker skill to know when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. Congress probably should fold its interference with internet gambling and certainly should get its 10 thumbs off America's freedom to exercise their poker skills online." Thank you, and I look forward to further discussion.
Well, it's an interesting discussion on personal liberties online, and I appreciate the comments from everyone. I heard it joked one time that liberalism is the philosophy that you should be able to be free to do whatever you want as long as it's compulsory. at least here, this is not. Nobody's going to force you to gamble. But the intriguing things, if we don't get to it in the Q&A, I agree with you on tax policy. Tax subsidies for gambling and things like that are certainly worth criticizing. Now, either side, we'll start right over here with quick questions. We've got about 10 minutes.
First, Mr. Pappas, you attributed that quote to George F. Will. I believe that was Kenny Rogers who said that. But my question is for Commissioner McDowell or anybody that wants to jump in on this. Can you talk about the December 21st decision and the minority's view that their jurisdiction, they had jurisdiction, and also how they distinguished themselves from the Comcast case?
So the majority's view in the FCC order of December 21st and their arguments for why they had the legal authority or the jurisdiction to do that, I think is the essence of your question. It's really kind of cockamamie. I'm pretty confident this will fail on appeal. I think it has a better than average chance of the order being stayed on appeal. In other words, having an injunction to freeze the FCC's order. Now, those are hard to get, so when I say better than average, that still might not be great because courts are sometimes loath to do that. But because of the irreparable harm that I talked about, that's a key component in the four-part test to get a stay. What they came out with was they recycled. So you have to go back actually to the Kevin Martin FCC, or Republican FCC, that came out with the Comcast order that tried to say that Comcast was blocking peer-to-peer software in violation of FCC rules when the FCC didn't have any rules. Instead of the court focusing on the fact that the FCC didn't have any rules, the court last spring focused on the fact the FCC didn't even have the authority to issue those rules based upon the arguments put before the court at the time. So you have to look at those arguments in that case. Those are sort of what I call the first string arguments. And the commission on December 21st came out with second and third string arguments. So, I mean, there's specific statutory citations I can cite, which most people won't know what the heck I'm talking about, but they tried to recycle Section 706, for instance. They tried to recycle statutory provisions that were passed in 1996 before the concept of net neutrality was even born. So I think it's ripe for appeal as a procedural matter, but this is important as conservatives. This whole issue is important. It's hard to describe. It's hard to explain, and I apologize if I don't do a good job. I wrote another op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on December 20th, just telling these guys backstage. And a couple days later, I met Charles Krauthammer for the first time. Not a stupid man, right? A very bright man. And he came up to, he said, I read your op-ed. He said, but I didn't really understand what net neutrality was all about. I said, well, I failed in the op-ed, I guess, sorry. But this is government regulation of the Internet. This is just state intrusion. Forget about all the mechanics of it and all the procedural stuff. But we don't know which appellate court's going to get it. If it ends up, let's say, in the Ninth Circuit, that's problematic temporarily, but I think ultimately if it goes to the Supreme Court, it fails at least 6-3.
Thank you. Okay, right over here.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. McDowell.
You're the commissioner.
Yes, sir.
Do you suspect that the Obama administration and its congressional allies are planning to try to restore the so-called fairness doctrine, which was never applied to newspapers and magazines?
Excellent question. It's an issue that I first addressed during the 2008 campaign. And by the way, I think net neutrality is sort of a fairness doctrine for the Internet, in that the fairness doctrine completely inappropriately named. 1945 said you have to air opposing views of controversial issues. All right. The chairman of the commission, Julius Genachowski, has said explicitly, I'm quoting almost verbatim, that he opposes the fairness doctrine either through the front door or the back door. So I assume that means explicitly or implicitly. Obama said early on in his administration that he opposed the fairness doctrine. I'm going to hold them to that, but there are a lot of backdoor ways that can be imposed through more regulation of broadcasters. So remain vigilant, watch out. Don't go to sleep on these issues, because these are freedom of speech issues which touch on every single issue being mentioned here at CPAC. So thank you. Excellent question.
Thank you.
We have a hard stop at 3:15, so if you can do quick questions and quick answers, we can get through a few more.
Yeah, this can pretty much be a yes or no question. Professor Kindt, this past week on CNBC, there was a special on online poker. There's a special on online poker, and it was about how sites based in South America had employees who were keeping track of the bets being made by other players, and we're then feeding them to other players in the room, and we're subsequently able to dupe gamblers out of lots of money. The United States can't do anything to get justice for these people. How does that?
Well, that's one reason why Congress had 10 years almost worth of congressional hearings on this, and that's one of the issues is that there's, and I held up the National Commission report as well as the United States International Gambling report. Both have concluded there's no way you can regulate this type of gambling. It's going to be lose-lose for people who are gambling on the Internet. Plus, it has these strategic economic ramifications, and that's why, even though the lobbyists are very erudite about this, all of these arguments about legalizing gambling on the Internet have been rejected by numerous bipartisan groups. You can't regulate it. The National Commission says you can't regulate it. You can only prohibit it. And actually, members of Congress have been saying we need to extend these prohibitions by entering into new friendship, commerce, and navigation treaties with other countries. And I thank you for allowing me to just bring these issues to the forefront in front of this group, because a lot of the public doesn't know what's going on with regard to these issues. It's an extremely important economic survival issue. It's not a libertarian issue.
If I may just comment real quick, the professor is completely wrong. It can be regulated, and one only has to look at countries, developed countries throughout the world that are licensing and regulating the activity, not just poker, but other activities online as well. It can be effectively regulated. It can be done in a way to prevent the kind of cheating that is occurring that you brought up. And if it does occur, the beauty of it is those countries can prosecute those players, and those companies that perpetrated those laws, those companies that flaunted the law, they'll be shut down. They're not going to be able to operate anymore. That is the way you can do it, and countries are doing it all over the world.
Okay, right over here.
Professor Kindt, you based your argument on the economic cost of gambling. You click a mouse, you lose your house as far as online gambling goes. And it seemed like the foundation for your prohibition of your thought of prohibition of gambling on online and on physical. I'm just wondering where the economic cost comes from. I see the gamblers, they put their money in slot machines. The money goes to casinos, which goes out to casino employees who can then spend that money as consumption. And if these casinos and legal and online gambling is taxed and regulated, that tax money can go to budget shortfalls. I'm just wondering where your economic cost lays in there, because it seems like the money is getting back to the economy somehow.
Great question. To make it short and sweet, the lobbyists who are pushing for this are very good at confusing these types of issues. We spend a lot of academic time, bipartisan, Commissioner James Dobson and others are working on these types of issues, going through every one of these. Believe me, if I could spin the facts toward gambling and not give you the facts, I could make a whole lot of money by going over to the dark side, as could some of my colleagues. But we're not going to do that. That's not what our job is. And when we testify about these economic numbers, we testify under oath in front of Congress, under oath in front of state legislators, under oath in deposition.
I know you can spin the numbers.
The lobbyists don't do that. So all I can do is summarize them for you in this limited time period.
When we're done at 3:15, everybody can come over to the back or the side and still talk.
I appreciate the compliment from Mr. Kindt that I'm able to confuse very smart people. There's no confusion here at all. Particularly my organization and our interest is the freedom of adults to be able to play poker on the Internet. Unlike the slot machines or other casino-style games, poker is a peer-to-peer skill game-based activity where individuals are winning and losing money to each other based on their own skill level. So I think a lot of the economic threats that he claims from traditional gaming experience may happen in the brick-and-mortar traditional gaming center setting, but online poker, that is not a threat.
Okay, less than 2 minutes. Last question over here.
This is a bigger question than just gambling, mostly for the professor, but it's an issue between both of these. Is gambling really an issue of protecting economic prosperity and structure of the whole economy, or is it an issue of personal liberty? And if it is an issue of economic structure, is it something that the government should properly regulate?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. The policy of this government is pro-gambling. We have gambling in 48 out of 50 states in the U.S., whether it be a racetrack, a lottery, casino gaming, what have it. So the idea that there is some anti-gambling atmosphere or policies pervading government is not the case. What is pervading is that when there is gambling, it should be regulated, it should be licensed, and it should be controlled.
We're talking about the very worst form of gambling here, which is gambling on the internet, which puts it at every school desk, in every living room, at every work desk. Literally, the commission has decided, the academics have decided, you click your mouse, you lose your house. You can't control this. If you could, I'd tell you that. But all of the authoritative information, the U.S. Justice Department, the National Commission, the U.S. International Gambling Report, 45 state attorney generals say no internet gambling. It won't work. It doesn't work.
Then do we want to say it's harmful, so we need to stop people from being able to do it?
This can destabilize the entire financial system, world financial system. This is much more of a threat than people realize.
Yeah. My 1-2 online poker game is destabilizing. I mean, it's just a remarkable statement, and it has no bearing in fact.
Folks, we're out of time here, but we can continue the discussion. Thank the speakers, please.